I'm a 29-year-old female and have been hiking at a wooded trail near my house for about 3 years now, and it's my favorite trail due to the beautiful waterfalls and meadows, but had several creepy encounters over the years. Luckily, I always hike with my 90-pound Burmese, Baker. He's the sweetest boy, but will protect me. First encounter was 3 years ago in the winter, when I was walking up a hill and Baker starts growling, unlike I've ever heard. I look around and realize that there's a man in the shadow of the woods, watching us. And when I notice him, he starts walking slowly towards us with his head covered. I said hello as usual and he didn't respond. I kept walking and got a feeling that I should turn back. When I did, I realized that he had turned around on the trail, middle of a hill, so not a common turnaround point. But once he saw me, he walked into the woods and stared out at the valley hugging a tree. Nothing too crazy, but it just felt very off. Around the same time a year later, Baker and I were walking on the same trail and again, Baker starts growling. He's usually very excited to meet anyone and anything. I realize there appears to be the same man standing off in the shadows watching us, but I figured that maybe Baker just scared him so he was standing away from us, waiting to cross the bridge. Otherwise, he easily could have kept walking along the trail instead of waiting for us. We crossed the bridge and kept walking. I again got a feeling that I should turn around. When I do, I realize he's behind us, so had no reason to be waiting for us to cross the bridge. I sit down with Baker by my side and pull out my phone while making it clear that I've seen him, not staring, just glancing in his direction. He stops when I turn around, even though I'm off the trail and not in his way, but he continues walking after I pull out my phone. I start walking back and find a large stick that he left that had been sharpened with a knife into a spear. I take that spear and continue walking while looking around me the entire time. I know now that I should have reported it at this point, but I just convinced myself that I was being paranoid. About a year later, in the winter, I'm walking along the same path. Maybe stupid, but I took a year off and again just convinced myself that I was paranoid. It's snowing with the trails mostly empty and I suddenly see a bunch of trees with frowning faces made out of snow, despite not seeing anyone on the trail for miles. Baker again starts growling at something in the woods that I can't see, so we turn around. I don't report it because I figured that it would never be taken seriously. And then today, a few months later, I'm walking along the trail and find a tree with "I see you" written in chalk. I immediately get a weird feeling and turn back and report it to the park rangers and police. Now update. I'm working with park rangers to keep an eye out. After sharing in my hiking groups on Facebook, several women have come forward with similar experiences at the same place. One woman was stalked by a man in a full snowsuit in the middle of July on this trail. Another was followed all the way to her car with him appearing along the trail watching her from the woods at various points. All of you calling me stupid for hiking on my favorite trail after waiting a year to go back are typical victim blamers, and I don't like you. I'm listening to the suggestions not to go back, but belittling me is unnecessary. I'm scared enough. Now update 2. 6 different women have come forward with similar experiences with a similar looking man at the same park. They've all reported it to the rangers. I've interviewed with the local news. They reached out to me and it's everywhere. Rangers are not happy with me for sharing with the public, but that's fine with me as everyone has the right to know. Someone wiped off the "I see you" message before the news team could see it, and it rained, but not that heavily. 3 separate women messaged me thinking it was the same guy, despite the women not knowing each other. They stated that he is unstable and spends most of the days at this park. His cousin reported him too, and I shared his name and photo with the rangers, and apparently the suspect is an old park ranger himself, so we shall see. Oh, and the suspect apparently loves climbing trees and has a bunch of photos of himself 50 feet in the air, so he's probably up in the trees watching and is the one who left that message. Now, final update. Apparently he has a secret spot in these woods where he has a chainsaw and gasoline, and we reported that to the rangers. Pretty sure having a secret campground in a public park is illegal with or without a chainsaw, and stalking and intimidation is a form of illegal assault, so There's no reason that he can't at least be questioned. This story is a little hard for me to write. At the time when I was a child, I didn't notice anything strange. It's almost like when you're a kid, you think your family is indestructible and can do no harm. My brother and I found out real quick that life isn't always smiles and sunshine. At least 20 years ago, if not more, my brother and I stayed overnight at our grandparents' house. This may seem like a drag for some people, but we loved it there. Grandma always had snacks and would rent us whatever movie we wanted to watch, and Grandpa always played games with us and found ways to make them even more unique. He had a wild imagination, and it was just fun to be around them. At the time, Grandpa's health was declining, even though we didn't realize that yet. And thinking about it now, it was obvious that Grandpa definitely was missing some steps compared to when we usually stayed over. But when you're a kid, you're just blind to all that stuff. I suggested that we play hide and seek. That was one of my favorite games to play with him. He always had the best hiding spots and would somehow find new places to hide every time we played. My brother was excited and we both begged my grandpa to play. He was a little dismissive at first, but eventually he was all smiles and agreed to play with us. We played a few rounds and it was like continuous laughter. When it was Grandpa's turn to hide, we were pumped. We knew that it was going to be a challenge and it always felt like such an accomplishment when we found him. My brother and I would have our own little competition as to who would find Grandpa first. I decided to go upstairs while my brother was downstairs. I was in the guest room where we would sleep and I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. I remembered it being closed before. I snuck over to the door and peeked through the crack. I could see my grandpa standing there just staring at the wall. I opened the door and shouted that I found him. He didn't move at all. He just stood there like a statue facing the wall. I moved a little closer and grabbed the back of his flannel shirt. As I was saying his name, he turned around and with anger and malice in his voice, he shouted, "Get away from me." It almost didn't even sound like him. It scared me half to death. I was so scared that I ran down into the kitchen and started to cry to Grandma. I'm sure she knew what was going on, but she consoled me anyway. Not 2 minutes later, Grandpa came downstairs all cheery and full of smiles and said, "I guess you guys couldn't find me. It looks like I win this round." My grandma went over to him and I heard her whisper that it was time to take a break and that he needed to go sit down in his recliner for a while. He looked confused but did it, and I remember almost feeling bad for him until I remember the look on his face in that closet. I was terrified all night. I remember Grandma telling him that I didn't feel good and that I was just going to stay in our room for the night. My brother had no idea. I told him that night that Grandpa snapped at me, but he didn't believe me. He said that Grandpa wasn't capable of being that mean. In the middle of the night, my brother woke me up, and he looked scared. I immediately came out of my groggy state and asked what was wrong. He told me that he could hear voices in the closet, the same closet that Grandpa was hiding in. I started to listen intently since the closet was not far from the bed. And he was right. There were voices in the closet. One sounded happy and you could hear the chuckles. Another voice sounded sad and you could hear light sobbing. We didn't know what to do. I snuck over to the closet door while my brother was hanging on my shirt, and I peeked into the closet and I remember vividly what I saw. It wasn't multiple people. It was my grandpa making all the voices. He was laughing, crying, and speaking erratically. We snuck by the door and ran to the living room, which was on the first floor of that house. We grabbed some blankets and hid underneath them, and my grandma woke up early and saw us downstairs. We told her that we just woke up early and were sitting downstairs waiting for her to wake up. We didn't want to tell her about Grandpa because we were scared. We didn't know what was going on. The voices that he was making in that closet were the most horrifying thing I'd ever heard. Grandma made breakfast while Grandpa sat in the recliner and watched sports highlights. He looked normal. Nothing about him looked evil. We just sat in the other room after we ate and waited for our mother to pick us up. When she arrived, we ran to the car and we saw Grandma whispering to her on the front porch. We noticed our mom's expression frown a little bit, and when we got back to the car, she asked us how everything went, and we told her everything. How Grandpa had snapped at me in the closet, and how we heard him erratically laughing and crying in the middle of the night. I don't remember exactly what she said, but it was something along the lines of Grandpa isn't feeling himself lately and that we were going to take some time off from staying there. We were distraught by that news, and we found out several years later that Grandpa had started to get dementia. As it got worse, he really started to lose it all upstairs mentally, and by the end, he didn't know anything that was going on around him. It was really sad. I understand as an adult, but as a child, seeing that horrible look in his eyes and listening to his erratic behavior was something that gave me nightmares for a long time. I was on vacation with my family when I was about 14. I was in the pool, which had a bar attached, and I was casually talking to this group of British people. I want to say it was all guys, but I think I remember a girl with them. I started drinking a bit with them. The legal drinking age was 18, but the people who I was drinking with gave me an extra wristband that they had because apparently they were leaving the resort that day and wanted to give it to someone. My parents didn't know about this, and neither of them knew that I was even drinking. They were clearly a lot older and kept putting drink after drink in my hand, and I was ecstatic because I was, well, getting drunk in a pool in Cancun and out of sight from my mother. They started to try to convince me that one of the guys in the group was 15 and that I should talk to him because he liked me. Even then, I knew that he definitely was not 15, but he also wasn't as old as the others who seemed to be in their late 30s. In hindsight, I'm thinking maybe mid to late 20s. I was young and just thought that they were joking around with me. They kept telling me that he liked me and that I should go hang out with him, and I laughed it off the first time, but they just kept suggesting it. Keep in mind, this whole time my dad was in the same pool talking to his friend, and he had his eyes on me for almost the entire time as well. My parents are very strict. He didn't know what I was drinking was actually alcoholic, and the pool was big enough that you couldn't hear what was being said. At that point, I was totally wasted. My first time actually getting seriously drunk. I don't even remember leaving the pool with this guy, trying to tell me that he was 15, but apparently my stupid self did because I remember thinking that he was cute. The resort is huge, and I don't know how I don't remember walking through the whole thing and not remembering it. I wonder what we spoke about. The next thing I remember is walking and approaching a bus stop that was a 10-minute walk from the resort. I know it was 10 minutes because my family and I often went to the bus stop to explore Cancun. He told me I had a nice body and asked me if I've ever been intimate with anyone. I just started laughing, and he sat on the bus bench and pulled me onto his lap. At this point, my world was spinning, so I don't protest, even though I remember thinking that I wanted to be back at the pool. It was then that something beautiful happened. I threw up all over him. Remember, I'm on his lap at this point, so it was like right in the middle of his face and on his chest, and kept throwing up, like the Exorcist level projectile vomiting. He was extremely grossed out, and I don't remember what was said, but we ended up walking back to the resort, and I never saw him again. I remember feeling so embarrassed, which is ridiculous in hindsight. I wobbled back to the pool area, covered in throw-up, where my mom had called the police, and her and my dad were freaking out. My mom's piercing voice sobered me up pretty quick because I remember those parts a lot clearer even though they're still hazy. They saw how drunk I was and demanded to know what had happened, so I told them, and then they got furious. My mom was adamant on finding that guy or his friends who had all disappeared from the pool. I didn't really see what the big deal was back then and why she wanted to find them. To this day, I think about what would have happened if I hadn't thrown up like that and actually left with him. I was 5'2" and 14 years old, and he was at least a foot taller than me and definitely not a minor. I remember when he was close to me with no one around, and even in my extremely drunk state, I started to get a bit nervous. My parents took me back to our hotel room, and I spent hours in the bathtub just throwing up. My mom was furious, like completely livid. I wasn't too surprised at that because she yelled at me over trivial things all the time. And so was my dad, which surprised me because he was always so easygoing and honestly probably would have been a bit amused at me being drunk, throwing up. Not in a cruel way, but because I was learning a lesson about alcohol that we all eventually do. He actually straight up told me that at some point before this whole vacation. But now I know that his anger wasn't directed towards me. He was cursing about the guy. I was still throwing up in the bathtub, and they both went into the kitchen area to talk away from me, but I could vaguely hear my dad cursing terribly while speaking to my mom in our native language, and I was actually scared. I couldn't quite focus on his voice because I was legitimately drifting in and out of consciousness at this point, but I remember getting less scared and more just sad because I felt like I had disappointed him. He never got mad like that towards me, but then again, I realized later that he wasn't angry at me, and he wasn't angry at the drinking. He was just angry at that scumbag. I remember wondering why they were making such a big deal. It was a few years later that I understood. Later on that day, because this all happened at like 2 in the afternoon, so I was at least cognizant by dinner time, I expected my mom to blow up at me over dinner when I was sober, as she usually does. That woman's like a live fuse, but they were both kind of just quiet and staring at me and didn't leave my side. I can't imagine what they were going through, knowing about the danger that I had been in hours before, staring at me like it was a miracle that I was there. I was young and stupid, but I would like to give my deep thanks and gratitude to beer for constantly annoying my stomach to the point of projectile vomiting.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
Hi, my name is Luna. I've always been a bit of a loner. My friend, Emily, suggested that I should join Snapchat to connect with people and maybe make some new friends. At first, I was hesitant, but I thought, why not give it a try? I created my Snapchat account and started sharing snippets of my life. It was fun, and I felt a bit less lonely. Soon I began posting educational videos, just like my friend Clara did. The response was overwhelming, and I started gaining followers. One day, I noticed a new message in my inbox. It was from an unknown ID. "Hey Luna, you're amazing. I love your videos," the message read. At first, I was excited that someone appreciated my content, but soon the tone changed. "I want to be with you, Luna. I can't stop thinking about you." The messages turned creepy. I felt a chill down my spine. Was this a joke? I decided to block the unknown ID, thinking it was just a prank. But the messages didn't stop. They came from different IDs, each one more explicit and unsettling than the last. I felt scared, and the thought of someone watching me sent shivers down my spine. I made the tough decision to close my Snapchat account, hoping that would put an end to the disturbing messages. Little did I know, my troubles were far from over. One day, as I was walking home, a student approached me, handing over a letter. "This is from an uncle who asked me to give it to you," the child said before walking away. I opened the letter, and my heart sank. "I told you that you can't escape from me. Even though you closed your Snapchat account, I will still possess you." The words were chilling, and I panicked. I rushed home, locked myself in my room, and spent the night in fear. The next day, I confided in my boyfriend, Mike. He comforted me and suggested reporting the incident to the police. But the idea of going through all that seemed overwhelming. Mike understood and decided that I should leave my job and come with him. He became my protector, dropping me off and picking me up from my new workplace. For a while, things seemed calm, and the nightmare of those messages faded away. But peace is often fleeting. One day, Mike couldn't pick me up due to heavy rain. I decided to walk alone, hoping to find a taxi quickly. As I entered a dark tunnel, the sound of footsteps behind me intensified. Fear gripped me, and I couldn't bring myself to turn around. Suddenly, a man grabbed me from behind, covering my mouth. I screamed, but the sound was muffled. I couldn't run. His grip was too tight. Panic set in. And just as I thought it couldn't get worse, police sirens echoed in the distance. The man released me and fled. Relieved, I saw the police jeep stop in front of me. "Are you okay? A thief is on the loose, and we're looking for him," the police explained. I couldn't find the words to share my own terrifying encounter, overwhelmed by anxiety. They called a taxi, and I reached home safely. Mike and I decided it was time to leave the city behind. Now we live in New York City, far away from the haunting memories of that incident. Strangely, the unknown messages stopped after we moved. Reflecting on that moment, I wonder if the man in the tunnel was the same person from Snapchat or just a random thief. The fear still lingers, but at least in a new city, I feel a bit safer. A few months later, I cautiously decided to give social media another chance. I created a new Snapchat account, hoping for a fresh start. This time, I kept my circle small, connecting with only close friends and family. One day, as I was scrolling through my Snapchat feed, I came across a message from an unfamiliar username. "Hey Luna, your videos are fantastic. Keep up the good work," the message read. My heart skipped a beat. Was this another unsettling encounter waiting to happen? I hesitated, but decided to respond with caution. "Thank you. I appreciate it," I replied. The messages remained friendly and supportive, and I started to feel a sense of relief. Maybe not everyone on social media was a potential threat. I continued sharing my content, gaining a small but genuine following. One evening, as I was about to log off, a message popped up. "I really enjoy your Snapchat stories. They brighten up my day," a follower expressed. Encouraged by the positive feedback, I replied, "I'm glad you like them. It's nice to connect with people who appreciate the content." As weeks passed, my Snapchat experience turned into a positive one. I built a small community of followers who shared common interests and passions. The fear that once haunted me started to fade, replaced by a sense of belonging. One day, I received a message from a follower I had interacted with frequently. "Hey, I'm organizing a meetup with some Snapchat friends. Would you like to join us?" The invitation surprised me, but after some thought, I agreed. It was an opportunity to meet people who would become more than just usernames on a screen. The day of the meetup arrived, and I nervously entered the designated location. To my relief, everyone was friendly, and we spent the day sharing stories, laughter, and building genuine connections. As the sun set, one of the attendees said, "This has been amazing. We should do it again sometime." I smiled, realizing that my perspective on social media had changed. It wasn't just a platform for potential dangers. It could also be a place for positive connections and friendships. In the end, my Snapchat journey took a turn for the better. The fear that once paralyzed me transformed into an understanding that not everyone online is a threat. Sometimes, all it takes is a fresh start and a small, supportive community to change one's perspective.
This happened back in 1989, and the story involves my stepdad, dad, biological dad, Donald Duck, and my sister, Sis. The person who exacted the revenge has passed now, so it should be safe to relate. And this is a revenge story that would warrant prison time, I believe. I was living outside the country when it happened, so my sister relayed all this information to me about a year after, and we recently got together and went over the events again. So my biological parents married when they were very young, and Donald Duck was still in law school. The marriage lasted long enough to produce 2 children. They didn't waste time in those days. My sister, who was 14 months, my elder, and myself. They were divorced before I was born. And Donald was a serial cheater, a pathological liar, and a total asshole. He still is at least a liar and an AR. He's in his mid-70s now, so maybe not doing much cheating anymore, but the fact that he is still working as a lawyer I think has indicated that he was never a good one, and he doesn't have enough to retire. I've looked at reviews on him online, and it's funny to see that most reviewers say that he is not only a terrible lawyer, but a horrible person. When Sis was 22, she was a single mother, and my nephew, her son, was around 3. Her company transferred her to another state, and she discovered that Donald Duck lived in a town near her new work location, and thought that he might be able to help her get out of bearings in a new place. For a short time when we were teenagers, we had some sporadic involvements in our lives after moving to a neighboring city. It was mostly him trying to impress us with how cool and rich he thought we should think he was. So though it has been a few years since she had seen him, it was not like they were strangers. In any case, Donald Duck agreed to let Sis move into his apartment with him, his girlfriend at the time, of course, many years his junior, and her 9-month-old child, not Donald's, until she was able to find her place. He also offered to allow her to keep her belongings in his storage unit. Says took him up on his offer. Never did Donald Duck make any reference to being paid for the use of the storage unit or paying for utilities at the apartment. Says stayed for 3 months and did her best to get out as quickly as she could. And as far as she could once, she became more familiar with the area. Living with him was hard. Did I mention he was an asshole? And her young son would find his pregnant lady porno mags around the apartment. This is pre-internet. Mr. Duck's young girlfriend was able to help with babysitting, something Sis paid her for. Eventually, she got her apartment. But all of her things, her son's toys, her furniture, household items, and everything. But her bed was still in the storage unit. So she called him to figure out how she could get her things back. But he seemed to want to hang on to them for some reason. He said, "You are my girlfriend's money for babysitting, and you can't get your things back until you pay her." She said, "Have you talked to her?" "I've paid her everything I owed her." He put down the phone and talked to his girlfriend, and she confirmed that she had been paid. And then he said, "Well, you owe 1/3 of the utilities for the time you were here." She reminded them that he had never said anything about that. So he got a little heated, and she was feeling desperate and angry. She then shouted an accusation of something he did to her when she was very young, which is a different story. And he responded, "Have you ever told anyone that?" "No," she said. "If you ever do, I will break your neck," he said. And the conversation ended there. She'd given up and thought she would never see her things again. When about 20 minutes later, she got a call from an acquaintance who had gone on 1 or 2 dates with Donald before she met my sister. She told Sis that Mr. Duck just called her, asking if Sis had ever told her anything he might have done to Sis, hinting at the accusation Sis had made since I had never told anyone, and the acquaintance told Donald as much as later calls my stepdad, whom we have always is considered to be our dad, and he was the only father we knew growing up, as he was in the picture before we were old enough to remember. He married my mom when I was an infant, and my sister a toddler, and they were together for many years until my mom's death. The guy's had a lot of faults. He passed away in 2017, and we often felt better when he wasn't around. But he tried. It's not easy raising someone else's kids. He was our dad as far as we were concerned, and he had legally adopted us. He had a lot of issues, but he hated to see anyone being taken advantage of if they were in a weaker position. In other words, he hated a bully, and Donald Duck was being a bully. When I was in the 1st grade, I rode a school bus with middle and high school students. There were a couple of kids who would bully me, and when he found out, he confronted the bullies and dads, and it ended. Another time, I was in 3rd grade and driving somewhere with him in his pickup around town, and he saw 2 young teenagers destroying a bicycle that he assumed they had stolen. He stopped and confronted them with his big framing hammer. Years later, he broke my mom out of a mental institution by threatening the director or some doctor, I'm not sure, with that same hammer. Yes, we were a fun family. Anyway, When Sis called him explaining that Donald Duck was holding all of her possessions hostage, she didn't know what to do. He told her that he knew several crisps who would be happy to rough him up and wouldn't even want to be paid. They would just do it for the fun. He was very bothered that Donald was keeping his grandson's things from him and wanted to hurt Mr. Duck. But Sis declined his offer. Then he asked her, what is the thing he values most in the world? His car. She said his car at that point was a Porsche. He had purchased new just a few years before. It wasn't quite the absolute entry-level model, but pretty close. Of course, he had all kinds of arguments about why it was better than more expensive ones, and obviously it was red. Dad was trying to come up with a way to not only get revenge, but to scare Mr. Duck, enough to force him to give Sis back her things. She said she was fine with whatever he wanted to do if it got her belongings back, but wanted to make sure none of it could be traced back to her. So nothing happened until about a month later, and Donald Duck called Sis out of the blue as if nothing had happened and asked, "Hey, when would you like to come get your things? How about this Saturday?" He had some change of heart that is unexplained to this day. So she said, sure. She didn't trust him, so she didn't want to go alone. She was able to get a male friend to go with her, and she got a U-Haul, picked up her stuff, and got out. That very same evening, she tried several times to call Dad to let him know that she got her things back, and all was well. No need for any drastic measures. But it was too late. The wheels had been set in motion. He never answered the phone. Remember, these are pre-cell phone days, so when you're not at home, you don't answer. Sis called Mom, who was living separately from Dad for a time. It's complicated, and told her she couldn't reach Dad. Mom said Dad was sick, and that's probably why he wasn't answering his phone. But then at 10:30 p.m., Sis got a call from Donald's girlfriend who asked her, "What are you doing?" "I'm at home in bed. Why?" She said someone just blew up Donald's car. My sister's heart dropped. She knew who did it. The police asked Donald who would want to do this to him, and he says his name. So she now becomes suspect number 1. Sis asked their girlfriend if Donald was scared, and girlfriend said yes. They were spending the night in a hotel. Fortunately, the call from my girlfriend to Sis, just a few minutes after the explosion, gave us her alibi. Sis lived over 30 minutes away and couldn't have answered her home phone if she had been the one to ignite the bomb. But the bomb did its job well. It had turned the Porsche into an unrecognizable wreck, took out the adjacent car, and destroyed many feet of the carport above both cars. I'm guessing the tank in a Porsche was nearly full. Just after Sis got off the phone, she called Mom telling her that someone blew up Mr. Duck's car, and she thinks it was Dad. While she was on the phone with Mom, another call came in, and it was Dad. He said mysteriously, "There's a box outside your door. Bring it in. You never talked to me tonight." Sis was a little afraid to open the box, but it turned out just to be some of her son's items that he had left with his grandpa's clothes and toys. Months later at Christmas, Sis asked Dad about it, and he confessed. Turned out he was very sick physically when he pulled that stunt. Sis was touched that he would go through so much effort and risk jail time for her, all while being ill. She asked him if he was scared of driving back, and he said yes, and that every headlight behind him he took to be a cop until he reached the state line. Sis found out from their girlfriend that the cop said the job was very amateur. Certainly not the work of a professional, but hey, it did the job. That Todd said he had asked a coworker who was once a member of the after-mentioned Crisps about how to make a car bomb, and she instructed him. He always did love blowing things up. When I was 13, we bonded over crumpling up the old colored sparklers into powder. I don't think they make the colored ones anymore, but they burned hotter, and we funneled the powder into the spent CO2 cartridges, and making bombs powerful enough to blow up those old metal milk cans that hold a few gallons. We did this for the 4th of July. Anyway, Sis said it was some sort of Molotov cocktail stuffed in the tailpipe, but I'm not sure how that would work. My idea of a Molotov cocktail is a 750 milliliter sized bottle, like a wine bottle or a fifth of booze, which would not fit into the tailpipe of a 4-cylinder Porsche. I'm guessing the diameter is no more than 2 inches? Not big enough to fit such a bottle. Maybe he used a similar bottle, or simply a smaller container of some kind, filled with something very ignitable. I truly regret not discussing it with him. But we weren't close since I left home. If you didn't need him, he had a hard time having a relationship with you. Plus, I was married to a woman for many years who kept me from my parents and siblings, so I don't have better details. Thank God that 25-year marriage is over, and my current wife loves my family. One hilarious detail: Donald Duck continued to father offspring and date very young women. His current wife is my age, exactly, and he has a daughter many years younger than my youngest child. A couple of years ago, I had a conversation with one of these half-sisters, and she's a marvelous person despite half her DNA. Her mother was never married to Donald, and this sister is the age of my youngest daughter. I told her the story of the exploded Porsche, and she found it very amusing, because she said Donald loves to tell a story about he was prosecuting some mob boss and a couple of thugs came to his door trying to threaten him. Of course, being the big, bad, brave man he is, he didn't back down. And what was his reward? Those thugs blew up his car. I think it's hilarious that he tells this story to his children. But now they know the truth. He's the biggest bullshitter I've ever met. Also, due to Donald's allegations that it was my sister who blew up his car, the condo association or whatever tried to